Wii from Nintendo will change game control forever.
Welcome to your motion-controlled future. You will dance and sing. You will play Call of Duty with a balance board. When you have played too long, you will be reminded to go outside. When you have been outside too long, you will be reminded to play Wii. Let's dance. Just dance.
Wii. Wii.
The Wii created a rift in the gaming community. To hardcore gamers, many of whom had just bought expensive HD systems, it was an underpowered machine totally reliant on the gimmick of motion in order to sell. It didn't help that early implementations weren't very good. Because the remote didn't have enough buttons, waggle, or meaningless shaking was used to perform actions a button could have done as well or better. Based on the comments that come up anytime motion control is discussed, it seems like a lot of gamers have held on to those negative first impressions. In fact, I expect this video to get a lot of drive-by shitposting, which is unfortunate because I consider motion to be one of the best innovations gaming has made in the past decade. This video will explore why motion is a good thing and why its adoption has been so uneven. One of the biggest innovations of the Wii was the infrared camera, which would see the LEDs in the sensor bar and use that data to move a cursor on the screen. This has the advantage of bringing your entire arm into the aiming process.
You have like 100 muscles in the arm. You got the
complete full range of motions, large movements, small movements.
You can make big swings from the elbow, or precise adjustments from the wrist. The range of movement afforded by this is huge compared to using your thumb to tilt a stick within a 1-inch radius, where the space for precise adjustment like aiming is a matter of centimeters. The difference in these inputs is so pronounced that you can see it in footage. Analog sticks aim in jolting straight lines while motion aim is fluid. When Resident Evil 4 launched on Wii, many people considered it a broken version of the game, because you weren't supposed to be able to headshot every enemy and trivialize the shooting like this. But many people also consider it the best version, specifically because the aiming is so good. Sin and Punishment 2 is another example of the same thing. Treasure had designed it with the GameCube controller and expected Nintendo's testers to say it was too hard, because if you're unfamiliar with Treasure, their games are batshit insane. Instead, Nintendo said it was too easy. They had been using the Wii Remote nunchuck, and they made short work of segments that were challenging on a traditional controller. Good luck making movements like this with an analog stick.
Goddamn son of a bitch!
The game had to be rebalanced to work because the IR camera was like cheating in games built for analog sticks. But it's not a cheat to use your own movement. The shooting is only easier because your intentions are realized better. This advantage gets more interesting when looking at competitive shooters, since they pitted remotes and controllers against each other. One would assume that a generational leap in control would have been a selling point for these games, but it was just the opposite. Because of the stigma surrounding the remote, GoldenEye was promoted with a dual analog bundle, with a lot of publications suggesting you'd be a fool for using anything else. It was as if the remote was only good for Wii Sports and didn't have this huge advancement in aiming built into it. This is where we have to address the illusion that dual analog is good enough, that sticks are the ideal input and that any attempt at change is a gimmick. You may have noticed that I'm not aiming at these enemies, yet the gun is finding its way to them. This is the crutch that makes dual analog viable. Because sticks are blunt and imprecise, developers have to deploy a lot of tricks to make it feel like you're aiming well. You can see the aim assist that moves your reticle onto an enemy, but there are hidden layers beyond that.
Don't even have to touch the right joystick. And then when I aim down the sights...
This little cross here that you see is actually where the bullets will bend towards. And as I go over him, you'll see it actually snaps to him. Magnetism basically means that we slow down your turning speed when you get close to an enemy. When you're inside of the magnetism cone, any movement that this guy does, your reticle will try and follow him.
Maybe you don't notice that it's helping that
Right.
much. Yeah, it just feels like you're that badass.
Yeah.
This is the reality of dual analog, an input method so poor that the game practically has to cheat on your behalf to make it work. One would think that the people who consider themselves the most skilled players would embrace the first input on console accurate enough to play without these assists, not reject it on sight. These assists are part of the reason the remote never caught on as well as it deserved. It didn't really matter that aiming was better when all you had to do was face the enemy and pull the trigger. Nintendo took the hint that many gamers weren't willing to move on, and with few exceptions, IR camera aiming died out when the Wii did. Nintendo moved on to gyro aiming, which is a step back in some ways. It has no absolute reference point like a sensor bar, so it loses calibration over time. It's not well suited to big, fast motions, and, excepting the Joy-Cons, the fact that moving and aiming are no longer separated into different hands makes it a little bit clumsier. But gyro doesn't replace dual analog, only supplement it. Gyro aim allows you to play with a normal control scheme, but when the time comes to make precise movements, the type a stick really sucks at, you get to use motion instead. One would assume that this would catch on more easily than the remote. It's not tied to the maligned Wii branding, it doesn't disrupt a normal control scheme, and can pretty much be ignored if you don't want to use it. And to an extent it has caught on, but only with a certain audience. For as handholding as Nintendo has become on the software side of things, they've been incredibly bold with pushing players to adapt to new hardware. Splatoon had a pre-release demo that left a lot of people confused and frustrated by the default motion controls. By the time the game launched, most people had adapted, and Splatoon has become one of Nintendo's best sellers using that same control scheme. It takes time to adapt to change, and this learning curve isn't unique to motion control. When dual analog first appeared, there was retroactively hilarious pushback about how awful it was. My first reaction to Mario 64 was wishing I could use the D-pad I was familiar with instead of the new analog stick. Getting over this curve requires you to devote time and energy to the controls, which a lot of people aren't willing to do for motion, because it's not cool. It's tainted with casual cooties, or they're just too used to sticks to bother. Some Xbox and PlayStation gamers seem to take pride in the fact that their platforms don't have motion. In Sony's case, the DualShock 4 has the same capability as Nintendo's controllers, yet motion is rarely an option in shooting games. It's not as if developers aren't willing to do the work. Many multi-platforms have gyro aim on Switch, and it's because Nintendo's audience asks for it. And that's because Nintendo has had the balls to push through the trial and error of finding something better every generation. Microsoft and Sony haven't been known to push players out of their comfort zones like this. As a result, their hardcore players are mostly free to think that motion control doesn't work without ever really being challenged about it. But if you want to talk about hardcore gamers, there's no one more hardcore than the PC crowd. The self-proclaimed master race, which retches at the thought of using anything but a keyboard and mouse for shooters. And they seem to like motion quite a bit.
The feature we're going to talk about today is the motion controls. Oh, it's so easy. Headshots, and it feels really comfortable too.
I was actually quite surprised with the amount of headshots I was able to land this game, so I think the motion controls actually fit MGS5 pretty well.
Not a very publicized thing, but it actually works really well in-game. I like the motion controls.
The Steam controller was intended to revolutionize with its trackpads, but to Valve's surprise, a lot of gamers used the motion sensors to emulate Nintendo-style gyro aim instead. Valve didn't advertise the feature much. PC gamers sought it out and adopted it themselves, joining Nintendo's audience in embracing gyro control. So why have the hardcorest of the hardcore accepted motion while console gamers won't? Part of it is that PC gamers are already acutely aware that there are better inputs than dual analog, while console gamers seem fine recycling it forever. There's also less partisanship over controllers on PC since it has so many input methods. Over 21 million controller users on Steam are not using the default Xbox gamepads. The PC audience is open to any inputs that work, and gyro aim does. There's something wrong about the fact that you can use the DualShock 4, a controller that wasn't made for PC, to get gyro aim in PC games that weren't programmed to have it, yet you can't get gyro on the PS4 itself, where the developers had direct access to the feature to include it. Imagine this for a moment. Microsoft adds gyro to their next controller, and all three consoles have parity with the feature. And by extension, X input on PC would natively support motion instead of having to rely on Steam configurations and workarounds. Developers add optional motion schemes to their games that players can either use or ignore forever. Everybody gets to play the way they want.
Then we're all happy!
What is the threat posed by this, and why wouldn't any PlayStation or Xbox gamer want this option to happen? The obvious reason is that stick-only users would suddenly find themselves at a disadvantage to gyro players, but if they don't consider gyro to be an advantage, they have nothing to worry about, right? Are we still stuck in the Wii days, where we're too worried about casuals destroying gaming to let motion anywhere near us? Imagine if I had been able to use the D-pad in Mario 64, and went on ignoring the stick in game after game, playing everything like it was Metroid fucking Other M, insisting that the pad was better while everyone else had long moved on to 360-degree analog character movement. I wouldn't have been able to do this.
Come on, go. That's not fair. God damn it! But fuck it!